So first of all, welcome. My name is Ray Pointer, ResearchWise AI. So Will's joining me at this point. We'll handle the more technical questions for sure. Philosophy. So a lot of the use of AI that I see, it looks at, say, some qualitative data. It will create some themes. It will generate sentiment scores. It'll output that as a file, and then people analyze it conventionally. This is particularly true of survey data. We've got 200 interviews. Let's allocate some themes. Let's allocate some sentiment scores. Then let's output that and we'll go into a cross-tabulation program. The philosophy that we've adopted is do a complete artificial analysis of the data and then refine that manually. So I've got a couple of data sets that I'm going to run through quickly. If you're not familiar with it, Kaggle.com is a fantastic site for downloading data that you can then use to help you learn and to experiment with things. So I downloaded 42,000 reviews of Disney parks. And this is the structure. In ResearchWise AI, the heading has to be the question that would have been asked. So, and B, because they'd got the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I made sure that the heading was how satisfied were you with your visit to Disneyland, where 5 is satisfied and 1 is unsatisfied. It now knows how to interpret that information. So row 1 always needs to show what the question was that was asked. And I took 200 copies of this, the top 200, they're all talking about Hong Kong, so that we could run through a simple example. In this first example, we're going to look at that Disney data. So I give the project a name and I select the data file I want to use. It tells me how much it costs. I select which question from the file I'm going to use and it starts creating the project. Now I can put in a business question. This helps refine the answer we get. Now I've speeded this up. It would, in real life, it takes a little bit longer, but I've speeded up the camera here. So it's analysed all the columns of the data, and it starts writing a summary that it's going to share with us. And here is that summary. And you can read it a little bit on the screen. It's actually quite nice. If we go further down, we can look at the opinions and that they are mixed. Some visitors enjoyed the shows, the rides. Others didn't like the overcrowding. But despite these criticisms, visitors had a positive experience. And it comes up with some recommendations too. We can look at individual questions. So here is how satisfied were people with the ride on a 1 to 5 scale. And it gives us a little commentary at the top about that 1 to 5 scale. And then we have the open-ended comments about how was your visit. It gives a written summary of its analysis. It gives us a word cloud. And then it creates these themes. So the most common theme was crowded and long queues. And we can go down and we can look at what was in that. Very crowded, overcrowded, so crowded, not really enjoyed the attractions. Then we can have a look at the mixed reviews. So the rides are more meant for children. This is great if it's the only park available to you. And we can work through the comments. If we look at the small size, likewise, it talks about how the Hong Kong park is smaller than other similar parks. And then some real positives about the convenience of it. We can export the data. We can export the presentation. We can export the report, or we can export the data file. If we export the data file, and that's what's happening at the moment, it produces an Excel file, and I'm going to open that Excel file, and if we look at that and we make it a little bit easier to read, then we see the original data, But then in addition to how was your ride in the open-ended comments, we see that it has put in the thematic coding, and after that it's put in the sentiment analysis. So as well as analysing things inside ResearchWise AI, you can export the information and use it elsewhere. So the starting point, whenever you do one of these projects, is with the overall summary. Then you can go into pieces and you can dive in more deeply and get more analysis. And the second example I want to share with you is taken from the 442 responses to the new MR study that I showed you a few moments ago. We collected that using the platform from one of our sponsors, Question Pro, and all we had to do was click Export Excel, tell it that we wanted one row for the questions, tell it that we wanted text, not codes, in the answers. It generated the 24 columns that you're going to see, and we then loaded in the data. Now let's look at the AI and insights data. So create a new project, give it a name, and then I'm going to select the Question Pro output. Now, because it's a Question Pro output, we need to select which sheet we want to use. I want to use the raw data sheet. And I'm going to tell it which columns to ignore. So there are various housekeeping columns in the data export, and I don't need those in the analysis. Just checking. So it starts to process the project and it asks us for the business question. And it starts to process them, working its way through the columns. And again, I've shortened the process just by speeding up the camera. So all the columns are analysed. It's going to write the summary. And then we get this overall report, as we mentioned before. And that was my starting point. I read that, get some ideas, and then I started looking into the individual parts of the data. But I want to show you something a bit deeper than we showed with the Disney data. So we get a standard chart here. This is how various organizations are going to be using AI at the moment. But I can ask it to cross-tab that, so I can look at differences between groups. So I select the relationship that organizations have. So are you a supplier, a buyer, etc. And then I'm going to filter it, because actually I only want the largest two groups. And the largest two groups are the suppliers to the research industry and the buyers of research. So and now we can see the difference between the buyers and the suppliers of research, and we can do this sort of cross-tab charting or cross-tab tables we can do as well for all the open questions and all the closed questions, looking at themes and the relationships. So the business model that underlies this is the more operations your file needs, the higher the cost. This is true for anybody who's using these platforms. They talk about tokens. The more data you send up, the more processing it requires, the higher the cost. So the way it works is you buy credits and then use the credits to run projects. There's single user and enterprise arrangements we can do with that. Security. We have an EU-based data center at the moment. We are expecting to have a US one in the future. All the data is encrypted. You've got user control at the project level. So if your company has 5 or 6 or 100 users of the project, then you decide which people can see which projects. At the moment, we use various tools, but one of the key ones is we have a license with OpenAI, which means they don't use it for training and they don't record what it is. If you want to try it, simply go to researchwiseai.com, and if you sign up, you'll get some free credits. You won't have to start by paying, which is always good. And let's go to any questions on that. I'm going to turn my camera on at this stage. And if you want to join me, Will, I'm just going to look to see what questions we had left over.
So if you'd like it, I can read the first question that's come in to you.
Well, just check and see any of the early ones. Okay. So does it work with non-English text scripts like Arabic or Japanese? I'm going to go with no at the moment. That's slight exaggeration. I've done it to do some things in Japanese, but I wouldn't want to be sure that all of the elements, so the sentiment analysis, etc., are all going to pick up on the characters. So my feeling at the moment is no. Will?
Exactly. We've obviously done some very light testing in this area, and what I'd say is we're not ready to go through the process of endorsing that usage. You obviously are able to write and read some level of Japanese. However, to be able to endorse it in non-English languages, we really would need to involve researchers that are native in those languages or very confident in those languages to tell us, yes, this is reliable, before we would encourage others. The tools are showing some usability in those languages, but it's not what we've tested properly.
Yes. And funnily enough, I'm going to be in Japan for a few weeks from next week. So I will actually be getting some of my colleagues there to play with it because they are far more likely to spot mistakes than I am. Got a good question in the chat from Rob. Can we handle non-structured qualitative data sets? For example, the transcripts from a qual interview. No, if it can't be configured into questions that everybody was asked effectively, then it's not appropriate at the moment. We want to get this specific tool right before we try anything else. There's all the indication is that somebody could do this for transcripts. And in fact, if any of you have signed up to my using qualitative AI for qualitative research course, which is being run on Tuesday, then you will see an example of using ChatGPT to tackle some transcripts as well. If the data is returned and you ask that the business question you asked isn't sufficiently refined, directed, is there a need to rerun completely with the fresh credits, or can probing tweaking? Will?
Yes, so it's a fantastic question. It's a great question. Today, you would need to rerun with fresh credits. However, this is absolutely something we've identified as an area for improvement, whereby the majority of the analysis has already happened prior to the business question stage and wouldn't need to be repeated to tweak the business question, and therefore a much cheaper refinement could be run. However, we have not built that feature yet. But please do continue asking about potential features like that, because that I sort of keep a score about the potential features and that prioritizes them.
So do we have any other questions? I'm looking at the Q&A tool as well.
So another question has just come in asking, can the analysis be done without a business question being specified? I mean, either one of us could answer that at the moment.
My understanding is, yes, it will run. You will just get a more generic answer.
Well, you will be held on the page asking you for a business question. You could then put in something nearly blank, a blank space, sort of dash. I actually haven't tested that thoroughly. But a lot of context for the AI comes from the business question. This is the equivalent somewhat of sending this file to perhaps a junior but very smart colleague. You've got an intern from Oxbridge or something, very wise, but doesn't necessarily have the world's most context on market research, and certainly your client. So your business question is a real opportunity to tell the AI what you're after.
And another similar one is the same data set will give you different answers. So if you think about the data we were looking at there, I could ask a question, what were the main worries about synthetic data? Or I could ask a question, what were the main worries? And I would get different answers for that. And I think that that's kind of what we want to develop. The idea behind the tool is that it's an interactive aid for you. It's to make you're the bright bit of the team. It can be the thorough bit. And together you end up with the right sort of outcome. So thank you for that. And we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thanks, everyone.